I had just finished cleaning the dinner dishes when someone knocked on my front door. It was nearly 9:30 on a rainy Thursday night, and my wife, Emma, had texted me an hour earlier saying she would be working late again. That excuse had become painfully familiar over the past 3 months, but I kept convincing myself that marriage required trust. I walked to the door, expecting a delivery driver or maybe a neighbor. Instead, I found a woman I had never seen before. She looked exhausted, her mascara slightly smeared from tears, and she clutched her purse so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Before I could ask who she was, she leaned closer and whispered, "Your wife is having an affair with my husband." My heart stopped beating for what felt like an eternity. I laughed nervously because it sounded too absurd to believe. Emma and I had been married for 9 years. We had built our lives together from almost nothing. She had stood beside me through job losses, family funerals, and every difficult season imaginable. The woman standing on my porch introduced herself as Claire. She apologized for arriving unannounced, but said she had spent weeks debating whether she should tell me. Then she pulled out her phone and showed me a picture. My wife was sitting in a restaurant, smiling across the table at a man whose arm rested comfortably around her chair. It wasn't proof of an affair by itself, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. Claire looked into my eyes and quietly said, "There are dozens more." I invited her inside because my legs suddenly felt too weak to keep standing. Claire explained that her husband, Daniel, had started acting strangely several months earlier. Late-night meeting, hidden phone calls, unexpected business trips, and passwords on every device. She had initially blamed herself, wondering if she had become boring or distant. But one afternoon she accidentally found hotel receipts hidden inside his laptop bag. That discovery led her to hire a private investigator. The investigator followed Daniel for 2 weeks and eventually photographed him meeting Emma repeatedly. Restaurants, hotels, weekend cabins outside the city. Every image carried another piece of my marriage away. Claire slid an envelope across my coffee table. Inside were printed photographs that shattered every illusion I had desperately tried to preserve. The room became painfully silent except for the rain tapping against the windows. I stared at the photographs without blinking. Emma wasn't being forced into anything. She wasn't confused or manipulated. She looked genuinely happy beside Daniel. They laughed together. They held hands. In one picture they kissed outside a boutique hotel while believing nobody was watching. My chest tightened until breathing became difficult. Claire didn't cry anymore. She looked emotionally drained, as though she had already exhausted every tear she possessed. Finally, she broke the silence with a sentence that surprised me even more than the evidence itself. "I don't want revenge because I'm angry," she said calmly. "I want revenge because people like them never expect consequences." I expected her to suggest exposing them immediately or sending the photos to everyone they knew. Instead, she unfolded a surprisingly careful plan. Daniel had organized a lavish charity gala the following month where hundreds of local business owners, investors, and community leaders would attend. Emma was supposed to accompany him publicly under the excuse that she was consulting on one of his company's fundraising campaigns. Their spouses were intentionally excluded from the invitation because the event included overnight accommodations at an expensive mountain resort. Claire smiled bitterly and explained that Daniel believed she would be visiting her parents that weekend. "Instead," she whispered, "we're going to be there together." At first, I rejected the idea immediately. Revenge wasn't my personality. I believed in honest conversations and quiet dignity. Claire didn't argue with me. She simply asked one question before standing to leave. "If you confront Emma tonight, do you honestly think she'll tell you the truth?" I couldn't answer. Deep inside, I already knew the answer would probably be no. Emma would deny everything until I revealed the photographs, then invent excuses, blame stress, or accuse Claire of manipulating me. Claire handed me her business card before walking toward the door. "Think about it," she said softly. "Call me only if you decide you'd rather expose a lie than become another victim of it." Over the next week, I watched Emma more carefully than ever before. Every smile suddenly felt rehearsed. Every excuse sounded practiced. She carried her phone everywhere, even into the bathroom. She laughed at messages she refused to explain. One evening, she kissed my forehead before leaving for another late meeting. 20 minutes later, I quietly followed her. Instead of driving downtown toward her office, she headed across town to a luxury apartment complex. Daniel was already waiting outside. He embraced her the moment she stepped out of her car. They disappeared into the building together, while I remained frozen behind the steering wheel. I realized the photographs had been only a fraction of the truth. That night I called Claire. She answered after the first ring, almost as though she had expected my decision. We met the following afternoon in a quiet coffee shop where nobody knew either of us. Instead of discussing anger, we focused on facts. Claire had copies of financial records showing Daniel had secretly used company funds to finance expensive gifts for Emma. I discovered Emma had been quietly draining money from our joint savings account to fund weekend trips she claimed were work conferences. The affair wasn't only emotional betrayal anymore. It had become deception, theft, and calculated manipulation. By the time we finished comparing evidence, we both realized something disturbing. They hadn't merely fallen in love. They had built an entire secret life while using us to finance it. Claire then revealed the final piece of her plan. She had managed to obtain invitations to the charity gala through one of Daniel's business partners. Instead of confronting them privately beforehand, we would attend together and allow them to believe their carefully constructed lies had survived. At precisely the right moment, when Daniel prepared to deliver his keynote speech about integrity, family values, and community leadership, the truth would arrive in a way neither of them could escape. Looking across the table, Claire asked quietly, "Are you ready to lose the life you thought you had, so you can finally discover the one you deserve?" I stared out the cafe window for several long seconds before giving the only answer that felt honest. Yes. The charity gala took place inside an elegant mountain resort overlooking a lake that reflected thousands of glowing lights. Wealthy donors, politicians, and business leaders filled the ballroom, congratulating Daniel for his generosity and leadership. Claire and I arrived separately to avoid suspicion, blending into the crowd like ordinary guests. From across the room, I spotted Emma in a stunning black evening gown. She laughed as Daniel whispered something in her ear, and for a brief moment they looked like the perfect couple. Neither of them noticed me. Watching them pretend to be respectable while knowing everything they had done almost made me walk away. But then I remembered every lie, every fake business trip, every dollar stolen from our savings, and I stood my ground. As dinner came to an end, Daniel stepped onto the stage to deliver the keynote speech. He thanked everyone for supporting the charity and spoke passionately about honesty, trust, and the importance of strong families. The irony was almost unbearable. Halfway through his speech, Claire nodded at the event technician she had quietly spoken to earlier. The massive projector behind Daniel suddenly flickered. Instead of displaying the charity's promotional video, the screen filled with time-stamped photographs. There they were, Daniel and Emma entering hotels, embracing in parking garages, holding hands at restaurants, kissing outside the apartment building. The ballroom fell into complete silence. Hundreds of shocked faces turned from the screen to the guilty couple standing beneath it. Daniel froze, unable to speak. Emma's face turned completely pale as she realized every carefully hidden secret had been exposed. Someone in the audience gasped while another person whispered Daniel's name in disbelief. The silence lasted only a few seconds before the room erupted with questions. Business partners stepped away from Daniel as though they no longer recognized him. Board members exchanged horrified looks. Several guests quietly walked out. Emma tried to reach me through the crowd, tears streaming down her face, but I calmly stepped backward. For the first time in months, she looked frightened, not because she had betrayed me, but because everyone finally knew who she really was. Daniel attempted to blame the photographs on manipulation and claimed they had been taken out of context. Claire walked confidently onto the stage and handed the master of ceremonies a folder containing hotel invoices, private investigator reports, financial records, and copies of messages that left no room for doubt. The evidence was overwhelming. Within minutes, members of Daniel's own board asked him to leave the event. Emma stood speechless, realizing there was no explanation capable of repairing the damage. The lies they had spent months building collapsed in front of hundreds of witnesses in less than 5 minutes. Outside the ballroom, Emma finally caught up with me. She cried harder than I had ever seen before and begged me to listen. She insisted the affair had started as friendship, claimed she never intended for it to go this far, and promised she still loved me. But I noticed something that changed everything. She apologized repeatedly for ruining her career, embarrassing herself, and destroying her reputation. Not once did she apologize for destroying my trust until I pointed it out. Even then, the words sounded rehearsed rather than sincere. I quietly removed my wedding ring and placed it in her trembling hand. "You stopped being my wife long before tonight," I said. Tonight, everyone else finally found out. The weeks that followed were difficult, but strangely peaceful. Emma signed the divorce papers without a fight after realizing there was nothing left to defend. Daniel's company launched an internal investigation into his misuse of corporate funds, and several business contracts disappeared almost overnight. Claire finalized her own divorce, determined to rebuild her life instead of living in the shadow of someone else's betrayal. Although both of us had entered each other's lives because of unimaginable heartbreak, we remained friends, helping one another navigate the painful process of starting over. There was no romance, no dramatic ending, just two people who understood each other's scars better than anyone else could. Nearly a year later, I stood on the porch of my new home, watching the sunrise with a cup of coffee in my hands. The silence no longer felt lonely. It felt earned. Losing the marriage I believed would last forever had nearly broken me, but it had also forced me to rediscover the person I had neglected while trying to save someone who no longer wanted to be saved. Sometimes the greatest act of revenge isn't humiliation or anger. It's refusing to let betrayal define the rest of your life. The woman who knocked on my door that rainy night didn't just reveal my wife's affair. She unknowingly gave me something far more valuable: the truth, the courage to walk away, and the chance to build a future based on honesty instead of lies. The life I thought had ended that evening was, in reality, only just beginning.